Hello, this is Mike Fish from Minnesota Real Estate and Management. Recently was asked about the closing process and kind of what that looks like. And so I figured I'd do an article about it and give a few details today. So in a nutshell, the closing process starts when an offer is received, right? Buyer makes an offer, seller signing that offer. At that point, the offer is turned over normally to a closing company. Now it's completely, as a buyer and a seller, you can choose whatever closing company you want. As a broker, most realtors or brokers are going to kind of have their favorite closing companies that they trust because they're certainly not all equal, right? Part of that process of if you're working with a seller or a buyer, a good agent will get a net sheet over so sellers can understand it's have a good idea of what that bottom line is if they're accepting an offer or if they're making an offer. Once the offer is accepted, earnest money is turned over normally within 48 hours. Earnest money needs to be turned over and held. The purchase agreement and everything is sent to that closing company again. And of course, the next step is home inspection is normally scheduled and conducted. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Then the appraisal is ordered. The title work, is received. They start working on that. Once the appraisal comes back and the bank says, yes, we're going to fund this, right? The closing's scheduled. The closing documents are reviewed. Then you're going to do a final walkthrough. And then everything's going to fund. And we're going to exchange the keys and the deal's done, right? If it was just that simple. As I always say, if it was that easy, there wouldn't be realtors involved, right? So let's talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls, some of the things that that can come up so that you understand the decisions that can be made and maybe have a little bit more information to help you navigate as your closing. First, let's talk about inspections, right? Now, I personally, on the buyer and the seller side, I personally push for pass-fail inspections. Not everybody agrees with me, but I've had too many experiences, especially on the selling side, where we get an offer and the idea of it is we're going to put in an offer, get rid of all those other buyers, and then we're going to renegotiate during inspection. So that inspection process nowadays is normally less than a week. Get an inspector in there, take a look at it. And that's a contingency where the buyer may walk away or they may try to renegotiate during that inspection period, right? The next common contingency, of course, is financing. And I guess what I would say is I always tell people, stay with the bank you know and trust. Certainly if there's any issues, we've got local people we trust to get deals done. And I'm a strong believer in the local banks when it comes to the lake homes around here. The third is the appraisal. And I always say the appraisal is kind of like the anchor of the deal, right? The bank is going to bring in the appraiser and they're going to basically make sure that the property is worth what the offer is. And if it doesn't appraise out, there's different moving pieces there where we can still save the deal. The closing company is going to check for any title issues, any encroachments, any easements. And I always encourage buyers to get title insurance. So I guess what I would say is to avoid issues, you want to make sure that you've got a good team. You've got to make sure that your broker and your realtor know what they're doing. Make sure you've got a good closing company. Make sure you've got a good loan officer. And a good seller agent or buyer agent is going to be in contact with that loan officer from the beginning to the end to make sure that everything's moving along, make sure communications is smooth. As I always say, the closing companies are the key to having that successful and smooth closing. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. Of course, reach out anytime if you have any questions. We would love to discuss our selling services or our buying services with you. But understanding that closing process, we saw it get longer when things were really crazy. Now it's back to about 30 days. So we're normally, to be safe, write the closing for on or before that 45-day range, but we're definitely seeing them get kind of shorter and shorter as things have slowed down a little bit. And of course, reach out if you do have questions. Thank you.